Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Oh, there we go. I would like to dedicate our learning today to Karen Diamond. 82-year-old beautiful woman who was a victim in that Boulder attack, the Molotov cocktail attack in Boulder on June 1st. She succumbed to her wounds today. Horrific murder by this man, Mohammed Soliman, and may he receive the justice that he deserves, and all terrorists like him. Please, everybody, be vigilant in your communities. Always be observant. See what's going on around you. Observe what is normal. What is a baseline? So that when you see some kind of anomaly, something that looks off, you notice that. And you get the heck out of there, or you report it. Or if you're somebody who is stepping up to be a shomer, to be a guard in your community, whether armed or not, then God bless you and protect you and strengthen you to protect the Jewish people and our allies. I mean, we've seen that attacks like this are also happening in churches and other houses of worship. There is just a sick, violent streak in society right now. And lies being told about the Jews and the Jewish people and Israel that are fueling this candidate for mayor of New York City, who will not distance himself from the comments he made, globalize the Intifada. These are very dangerous times we're living in, my friends. And please, God, protect us, and may we soon have a secure and lasting peace for the nation of Israel everywhere, and for the land of Israel, and for everyone that loves truth and loves God and blesses the Jewish people. May we soon have peace. Let us say amen, and let us dedicate our learning today to Karen Diamond. Who's in the house? Yehuda in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Shendor in the Bronx, Paul in the Great Northwest, Gail in Kansas City, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Guy in Ohio, John in Maine, Belle in Texas, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lorraine in Texas, as well as Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City. Our daf today is page 9 here in Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 3 in chapter 1. We're picking this up near the top of page 8b, since we did a double yesterday. So the Mishnah taught about these holidays of the idolaters, and we're really speaking about Rome here. So the Mishnah taught, and Kretisis, right? Which Kretisim in Hebrew, but Kretis, right? So we're in English, Kretisis, and I suppose it's a little bit closer to the Latin. And Kretisis, and the day of the festival of their kings, right? These are also days in which the Romans and the idolaters would make sacrifices to their idols, and so we don't do business with them. So that would give them further cause to celebrate, or more offerings to offer to their idol. So the Gemara asks, what is Kretisis? And Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel says it commemorates the day when Rome seized control of an empire. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that two festivals are Kretisis and the day when Rome seized control of an empire? And this indicates that Kretisis and the day when Rome seized control of an empire are two separate idolatrous festivals. So Rav Yosef said on two separate occasions, Rome seized control of an empire. One occurred in the days of Queen Cleopatra, when they conquered Egypt. And one happened much earlier, when Rome seized control in the days of the Greeks. When did the Greek Empire give way to the Roman Empire? That was a big celebration for the Roman Empire. And the Gemara elaborates, as when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, right, from the land of Israel and the Jewish learning community there, to Bavel and the Jewish learning community there in Babylonia, as when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said the Romans waged 32 battles with the Greeks, but were unable to defeat them until they formed a partnership with the Jewish people and finally vanquished the Greeks. And this is the condition that they stipulated with the Jewish people. If the kings come from among us, the governors will come from among you. And if the kings come from among you, the governors will come from among us. And the Romans sent the following message to the Greeks. So now we're going to have a very interesting exchange. You know, how did Rome historically seize control of the Greek Empire and become the new dominant force in the world? Mostly by war, right? Some amounts of economic warfare, diplomacy, but a lot of battles. And the Jewish people were always a very small people, but strategically very important because the Holy Land is there at the crossroads of the world. You have Persia to the east, eventually China, all kinds of trade routes, north, to Turkey and whatever that area of the world was called then, south to the sea, to Africa. It was a real crossroads of the world. And so the Jewish people had some importance, even though they were subjugated before the Roman Empire to the Greek Empire. Now, one thing that's very interesting as we read this is this Jewish long view of history, right? Because even when the Greek Empire came along and took over that part of the world, the Jewish people were over 1,000 years old, very old, had been around a very long time. And that was over 2,000 years ago, right? So the Jewish view of history is not like other nations. And with these empires, even an empire that lasts 1,000 years, and no other empire has, they come and go. In the eyes of the Jewish people, those other empires, they come and go. And so it's something also for us to remember, because really we have only one king, our Father in heaven. And there are times, where people in history, Jews really pin their hopes and their allegiance on some earthly king and some earthly government. And that is misplaced trust. Certainly, we appreciate our friends and are only too happy to have a great relationship with our friends and allies and to work with them. But eventually, things change, as you'll see here, right? So when the Roman Empire was the upstart Roman Empire, they had a lot of trouble with the Greeks and couldn't overcome them. And like the British Empire much later, how did they eventually assert power? By making local alliances to battle against their enemies. The Jews were one such alliance that lasted for a while. We had a good relationship with the Roman Empire in the early days. Lasted 26 years. Modern times, 26 years sounds like a long time. Historically, blink of an eye. So let's see what happened here. So Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, and he said the Romans waged 32 battles with the Greeks, but were unable to defeat them until they formed a partnership with the Jewish people and finally vanquished the Greeks. And this is the condition that they stipulated with the Jewish people, etc., that if the kings come from among us, the governors will come from among you, and if the kings come from you, the governors will come from among us. We're really working together, sort of governing this region. And the Romans then, with this alliance with the Jewish people in place, sent the following message to the Greeks. Until now, we attempted to resolve our conflict through fighting battles. Now let us settle the matter by means of judgment. In the case of a pearl and a precious stone, which one of them should serve as a base for the other? The Greeks sent to them in response, the pearl should serve as a base for the precious stone, which has a greater value. So the Romans further inquired if there was a precious stone and an onyx. which is a particularly valuable precious stone, then which one of them should serve as a base for the other? The Greeks answered the precious stone should serve as a base for the onyx. And once again, the Romans asked, well, in the case of an onyx and a Torah scroll, which one of them should serve as a base for the other? And the Greeks responded, the onyx should serve as a base for the Torah scroll. Right? In the early days of Rome, they showed tremendous respect to the Jews and Jewish history and the Torah. So then the Romans sent this response to the Greeks. Well, if that is so, if that is so, then you, the Greeks, should submit to us, as we have the Torah scroll with us, and the Jewish people are with us. So the Romans are akin to the precious stone, and they are allied to the Jewish people who are akin to the onyx, and they therefore possess the Torah scroll. The Romans therefore, and the Jews possess the Torah scroll. Right, so piling up what is valuable. So the Romans therefore forced the Greeks to surrender and took over their world dominance. And for 26 years, the Romans stood faithfully with the Jewish people. But from that point forward, the Romans, subjugated them, the Jews. And the Gemara asks, initially when the Romans acted faithfully, what verse did they interpret? And ultimately, when they subjugated the Jews, what verse did they interpret? Right? As if the Romans ruled their empire with, giving deference to the words of the Tanakh, of the Bible, and particularly the Torah. So what did they interpret? So initially, they interpreted the verse where Esau said to Jacob, upon their meeting, when Jacob returned with his wives and children to the Holy Land, Genesis 33:12, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before you. And in this verse, Esau equates himself to Jacob, prefiguring the initial Roman treatment of the Jews, because Esau is understood to be the forebear of Rome. And ultimately, they interpreted the verse that recites Jacob's response to Esau, let my Lord, I pray you, pass over before his servant, in Genesis 33:14, demonstrating Jacob's subjugation to Esau. In other words, Esau subjugating Jacob, and by extension, the Romans subjugating the Jews. So the Gemara asks, with regard to those 26 years during which the Romans stood faithfully with the Jewish people, from where do we know that this is the case? And the Gemara cites a proof. As Rav Kahana says, when Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, fell ill, the sages sent the following message to him. Our teacher, tell us 2 or 3 statements that you once told us in the name of your father, Rabbi Yosef ben Halafta, as we do not remember the statements precisely. And Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, said to them the following statements that were passed down to him by his father. 180 years before the second temple was destroyed, the evil empire, this is Rome, stretched forth over Israel and ruled over them. 80 years before the temple was destroyed, the sages decreed impurity on the land of the nations and on glass vessels. 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the Sanhedrin was exiled from the chamber of hewn stone and sat in the store near the Temple Mount. The Gemara asks, with regard to what law, what halacha, is it necessary to know where the Sanhedrin would convene in those late years of the Second Temple period? And Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said it is necessary in order to say that they no longer judged cases of fines, monetary fines, which can only be adjudicated by ordained rabbis, ordained sages. Now, when we say that rabbis are ordained in the year 2025, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about sages, the ordaining of sages in the ancient world. That was a much more limited number of people who were ordained. Basically, they were being recognized as sages who had memorized the entire tradition and were capable of the analysis necessary to issue judgments. And you had to be operating at that highest level in order to be able to assess fines according to Torah law. So they stopped judging cases of fines. And the Gemara asks, does it enter your mind that at this point the Sanhedrin no longer judge cases of fines. But doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says, indeed, that man will be remembered favorably, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is his name, as had it not been for him, the laws of fines would have been forgotten from among the Jewish people. And the Gemara challenges this assertion. Would the laws of fines actually have been forgotten? Let the scholars study them so that they will not be forgotten, even if there are not ordained sages who can judge according to the laws of fines. So rather, his intention was to say that the laws of fines would have ceased to be implemented from among the Jewish people, as they would not have been able to adjudicate cases involving these laws due to the lack of ordained judges. And this is because at one time the wicked kingdom of Rome issued decrees of religious persecution against the Jewish people with the aim of abolishing the chain of ordination and the authority of the sages. And they said that anyone who ordains sages will be killed, and anyone who is ordained will be killed, and the city in which they ordain judges will be destroyed, and the areas around the boundary of the city in which they ordain judges will be uprooted. These measures were intended to discourage the sages from performing or receiving ordination due to fear for the welfare of the local population. Right? This was a time of intense persecution of the Jews. And the form that it took was they wanted to root out Judaism. Judaism is practiced for centuries upon centuries, which required this transmission of the tradition from sage to sage so that they could issue judgments according to Torah law and everything that went into that. And the Romans said, what we'll do is we'll just kill all the sages, and we'll make sure that they don't ordain any new sages on pain of death. And not only if we catch a sage ordaining another sage, we'll kill them, but any town that allows this to happen in their town will kill all the Jews in that town. It's a terrible, terrible period. What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do during such a time of intense persecution? He went and sat between two large mountains, and between two large cities, and between two Shabbos boundaries, meaning the extension of the boundary 2,000 cubits away from that city. And which two cities was he closest to? Between Usha and Shepharim. So therefore, he was in a desolate place that was not associated with any particular city, so that he would not endanger anyone who was not directly involved with what he was doing, which is to ordain some new sages. And there, in that desolate place, he ordained 5 elders, namely Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yosei, whose names we're constantly quoting here in the Gemara, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, and Rav Avia adds that Rabbi Nehemiah was also among those who were ordained that day. When their enemies discovered them, right, when the Romans got wind of what was going on, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said to the newly ordained rabbis, "My sons, run for your lives." They said to him, "Our teacher, what will become of you?" Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was elderly. He was unable to run. He said to them, "In any case, I am cast before them like a stone that cannot be overturned. Even if you attempt to assist me, I will not be able to escape alongside of you because I am old and frail. I can't run fast. But if you do not escape without me, you will also be killed. And then what did we accomplish here? By me ordaining you so that the transmission of our law would not die with me. Get away. Get away so that the tradition is transmitted to your generation and by you to the next generation. Get away now." And people said about this incident, the Roman soldiers did not move from there until they had inserted 300 iron spears into his body, making his body appear like a sieve pierced with many holes. It can be inferred from this episode that there were ordained judges who could hear cases of fines for many years after the destruction of the temple in contrast to Rabbi Yitzhak bar Avdimi's statement. So we told this story just to illustrate that the Sanhedrin was ruling in cases of monetary fines. Thank God, thanks to the courage of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Incredible that coincidentally on the day that we're dedicating to the memory of Karen Diamond, who was killed for being a Jew, who was involved in a peaceful protest, walking, in a park in Boulder, Colorado, to bring attention to the hostages that are still being held in Gaza, and then she was murdered by this psychopath, for being a Jew. And here it is happening in the year 2025. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says in explanation, do not say that after the Sanhedrin was exiled from the chamber of hewn stone, they no longer judge cases of fines. Rather, amend this statement to say that they no longer judge cases of capital law, as a court does not have the authority to hear capital cases when the Sanhedrin is not sitting in the chamber of hewn stone. And that was a change. That did happen. And the Gemara explains, what is the reason that the members of the Sanhedrin ceased to meet in their proper place and thereby ended the adjudication of capital cases? Once they saw that the murderers were so numerous and they were not able to judge them and punish them with death, they said it is better that we should be exiled from the chamber of hewn stone and move from place to place so that the offenders will not be deemed liable to receive the death penalty in a time period when the court does not carry out their sentences. This is also a time when they were being ruled by Rome, and they were probably not able to carry out death sentences. And so better that they should not be having trials like this, and not be able because it was not, the Jewish people were not living under the sovereignty of Torah during this period because of the subjugation to the Roman Empire. The Gemara returns to the earlier comment of Rabbi Yishmael in the name of his father, Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta, that the Roman Empire ruled over Israel 180 years before the Second Temple was destroyed. So the Gemara asks, did Rome rule over Israel for 180 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, and not more than that? But didn't Rabbi Yosef the Great, i.e. Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta, himself teach, and now we're on page 9a, the Persian Empire, which ruled the world before the construction of the Second Temple, continued to do so for 34 years in the presence of the temple, i.e. after the temple was built. And the Greek Empire ruled for 180 years in the presence of the temple. The Hasmonean dynasty, right, that we hear about in the Hanukkah story, that defeated the Greek Empire for control of the Holy Land. The Hasmonean dynasty ruled for 103 years in the presence of the temple. And the Herodian dynasty, right, Herod, likewise ruled for 103 years. And from this point forward, you can go and calculate the date on which an event occurred by how many years it happened after the destruction of the Second Temple. So according to this statement of Rabbi Yosef, evidently when the Greek rule over the Jewish people ended and the Roman rule began, it was actually 206 years before the Second Temple was destroyed, i.e. the two sets of 103 years of the Hasmoneans and the Herodians. But you said that when the Roman Empire stretched forth over Israel and ruled over them, it was 180 years before the temple was destroyed. But this is not a contradiction. Rather, it proves that for 26 years, the Romans stood faithfully with the Jewish people, honoring their agreement, and did not subjugate them. And therefore, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, does not count those 26 years among the total years in which the evil empire, the Roman Empire, stretched forth over Israel and ruled over them. Apropos the above Baraisa, the Gemara relates that Rav Papa said, if this Tana, i.e. one who dates the years in reference to the destruction of the Second Temple, forgot and did not know the details of the date with regard to exactly how much time had passed since the destruction of the temple. For example, he remembered the century, but he could not recall the exact date and year, the exact decade and year. let him ask a scribe who writes official documents how many years he writes when he dates the documents. The dating system of scribes uses as its starting point the beginning of the Greek rule 380 years before the destruction of the temple. And let him add 20 years to that number. And in this manner, he will find his number. And your mnemonic to remember this system is the verse, these 20 years have I been in your house. Speaking about Jacob with Lavan, but it's just to help us remember this additional 20 years that you need to add to understand this dating system of the empires that came and went during the Second Temple period. And similarly, if a scribe forgot the exact year, let him ask the Tana how much time he calculates has passed since the temple's destruction, and he should deduct from that number 20 years, and in this manner he will find his number. And your mnemonic to remember that the Tana adds 20 to the date of the scribe, whereas the scribe deducts 20 from the number of the Tana, is as follows: a scribe deducts while a Tana adds. This is a play on the phrase Tana Tosafah, which also means to teach, the Tosefta, which is the practice of a Tana. Now, in relation to the discussion on the calculation of years, the Gemara states that one of the sages of the school of Eliyahu taught, the world is destined to exist for 6,000 years. Fascinating, right? The world is destined to exist for 6,000 years. Now, we are in the year 5785 since the creation of the world, according to the Hebrew calendar. So if this is true, if Y6K is when this world ends and then we enter, the times of Mashiach, it's not so far away. It's not so far away. 215 years. So the school of Eliyahu taught the world is destined to exist for 6,000 years. For 2,000 years, the world was a waste, as the Torah had not yet been given. The next set of 2,000 years are the period of the Torah. The last set of 2,000 years are the period designated for the days of Mashiach. So according to this, the concept was that Mashiach would have arrived in the year 4000, quite a while ago, right? So 1785 years ago. So sometime, right, after the destruction of the Second Temple, basically the period of the Mishna, early period of the Gemara, 1785 years ago, is when Mashiach should have come, but he didn't come. So what happened? So the last set of 2,000 years are the period designated for the days of Mashiach. But due to our many sins, there are those years that have been taken away from them, i.e. such and such years have already passed and have been taken away from the 2,000 years that are designated for Mashiach, and Mashiach has not arrived. This is them talking, 1700, 1600, 1500 years ago. So whenever a Tana taught this Baraisa, he would insert the number of years that was correct for his time. In other words, Mashiach should have come around the year 4000. He didn't because of our sins, and his arrival keeps getting delayed because of our sins. The Gemara asks, with regard to the 2,000 years of the time period of the Torah, from when are they counted? If we say that they started from the beginning of the Torah until now, well, then there is not enough time in all these years. As when you examine the calculations, it is evident that from the creation of the world until the giving of the Torah, there were 2,000 years plus a part of this third thousand, as the Torah was given 2,448 years after the creation of the world. Right? Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, was in the year 2448. So not in the year 2000. What happened? Was the Torah given 448 years late, according to this calculation? This would mean that the time period of the Torah already encroaches upon the days of Mashiach, right? If that 2,000 years of the middle period was delayed 448 years, then already it's like we're getting into the days of Mashiach. So rather, the 2,000 year period of the Torah is not, it didn't come 448 years late when the Torah was given. Actually, the time of Torah started earlier than when the Torah itself was given. When was that? when Abraham and Sarah connected to God and started teaching there is one God in the world. So rather, the 2,000-year time period of the Torah is counted from the time when it is stated about Abraham and Sarah and the souls that they had gotten in Haran in Genesis 12:5, which is interpreted by the sages as referring to the men and women who were brought closer to the Torah by Abraham and Sarah. Therefore, it was at this point that the Torah began to spread throughout the world, and it is learned as a tradition that at that time Abraham was 52 years old. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, because Genesis 12:5 talks about them, bringing people to the knowledge of God. Genesis 12:3 is where God says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, right, and your descendants, and I will curse the one who curses you and your descendants. How many years are missing from the 2,000-year period of Mashiach, of the Messiah? If the period of the Torah that is taught by the Tana here is counted from the giving of the Torah, well, there are 448 missing years. So when you examine the calculation from the time when it is stated about Abraham and Sarah, the souls that they had gotten in Haran, until the time of the giving of the Torah, those are the 448 years. So with regard to this Barais as well, Rav Papa said, if a Tana, but a Tana is a sage of the period of the Mishnah, and earlier. So if a Tana meant to state that at his time, such and such years were already lost from the 2,000 years that are designated for the days of Mashiach, but he forgot and he did not know the details of exactly how much time had passed, let him ask a scribe how many years he writes when he dates documents, and let him add 48 to the number, correcting for the century, and in this manner he will find his number. And your mnemonic for this is the verse 48 cities. And similarly, if a scribe forgot the exact year, let him ask the Tana how many years does he teach have already been lost from the 2,000 years that are designated for the days of Mashiach, and he should deduct 48 years from the number, correcting for the century, and in this manner he will find his number. And your mnemonic to remember who adds and who subtracts is that a scribe deducts and a Tana adds. We're on page 9b. Again, this is helping us understand these various dating systems, right? Back in ancient times, they didn't have what we have, right? Like this kind of like standardized year. That the whole Western world says it's 2025. Back then, different regions, different nations, different empires had all kinds of different systems of dating. The Jews had their own dating back to the creation of the world, but also had to keep mindful of the reigns of Jewish kings, and then later the dating systems of the Greeks, the Romans, etc. And there was a lot of confusion when they had to actually write legal documents that would hold up. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, in the case of one who does not know which year of the 7-year sabbatical cycle he stands in, he should add 1 year to the years that have passed since the destruction of the temple in order to begin at the start of a sabbatical cycle. And he should calculate the general years, i.e. the centuries, as jubilee cycles, as every jubilee concludes 7 completed sabbatical cycles of 49 years. A jubilee comes every 50 years. And the details as sabbatical cycles, he should divide the remaining years into 7-year cycles. But as the Jubilee year itself is counted as one of the sabbatical cycles, he should take from every 100 years that pass 2 years and add it to the details, i.e. the remaining decades and single years. And then he should calculate with the details by dividing them into sabbatical cycles, and from the remainder he will know how many years in the current sabbatical cycle have passed. And your mnemonic, that 2 years must be deducted from every century, is the following verse. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land. And Rabbi Hanina says, after the year 400 from the destruction of the temple, if a person says to you, purchase a field that is worth 1,000 dinars for 1 dinar, don't purchase it. It is not a worthwhile investment, as the redemption will soon come, and all fields will revert to their original owners. Right? Beautiful, beautiful, hopeful advice, that the concept being 400 years, so the temple was destroyed in about the year 70 of the Common Era, some say the year 69, so almost 2,000 years ago, and he's saying, well, 400 years after that, we are so close to Mashiach coming and redeeming the world that don't bother, buying a field, that no matter how many years you're purchasing it for in the land of Israel, which will revert to the holdings of the ancestral families like they were doled out in the days of Joshua when he led the children of Israel into the promised land, basically saying that Mashiach is around the corner. They just thought the Messiah would come any day now in the period that they're talking about, right? The Mishna was closed around the year 200. The Gemara was closed around the year 500 of the Common Era. Here they're talking about the year 470, right? More or less. As it was taught in a Baraisa after the year 4231, right? 4231 from the creation of the world. If a person says to you, purchase a field that is worth 1,000 dinars for 1 dinar, don't purchase it. It's not worth it, because the redemption is at hand. And what is the difference between the two dates? The Gemara answers there's a difference between them of 3 years, as the Baraisa adds 3 years. The year 400 from the destruction of the temple corresponds to the year 4228 from the creation of the world. New subject. The Gemara relates, there was a certain promissory note, right? So a contract for a loan, in which it was written, and now we're on page 10a, in which it was written, a date that had 6 additional years relative to the correct scribal date, which takes for its starting point the beginning of Greek rule. And the sages who studied before Rabbah thought to say, this is a post-dated promissory note, which can be used only from the date it specifies. Therefore, let us hold it until its time arrives, so that the creditor will not repossess property that the debtor bought prior to the date that appears in the note. So Rav Nachman disagreed, and he said the promissory note was written by an exacting scribe, and those 6 years are referring to the years when the Greeks ruled only in Elam. We do not count them, as Greek rule had not yet spread throughout the world, but he does count them. And therefore he wrote in the promissory note the correct time, as the date does in fact match the year in which the promissory note was written. Right, so you get the picture. It's like they're arguing about a contract, which includes a date at which the loan was extended, and therefore if the borrower does not pay, the creditor will have a right to seize property that belonged to the borrower, even if the borrower sold that property to some third party, but only from the time that the promissory note was written. If he had sold that land prior to taking the loan and having this promissory note written, the creditor could not seize that land from some third party that bought it from the borrower. That's why it matters. Now, in terms of the dating system that was used by the scribe who wrote the promissory note, it's very interesting that it's not just obvious, like what year was it when the note was written? The scribe himself is interpreting Bible verses, is sort of recounting history and the history of the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. And there could be some discrepancy in the way that scribes interpret verses from the Bible, interpret the history of these various empires, that could cause the judge before whom this case of the promissory note comes to have to figure out, okay, what did this scribe mean? What year are we talking about? Rav Nachman cites a proof for his resolution, as it is taught in Baraisa, that Rabbi Yosei says the Greeks ruled for 6 years in Elam alone, and afterward their dominion spread throughout the entire world. And it is the later event that serves as the basis for the dating system used by most scribes. Rav Acha bar Yaakov objects to Rav Nachman's answer. From where is it known that we count years according to the Greek rule, and that this promissory note was dated according to a system that uses the Greek rule as a starting point and was written by an exacting scribe? Perhaps we count the years using the Exodus from Egypt as the starting point, which occurred 1,000 years before the start of the Greek rule. And in this case, the scribe left out the first 1,000 years from the time of the Exodus and held on only to the last 1,000 years, omitting the thousands digit and writing merely the hundreds, tens, and single digits. Now, lest you think that sounds weird, that's exactly what we do now. Right? So when we talk about what year it is, if you go to a cemetery and you go to a Jewish cemetery and you see the year written of when someone died, if it's written in Hebrew, right? So in English, okay, they might write, that somebody was born, 1905 and perished 2025 and lived 120 years. But in the Hebrew, it'll be the deck date will be, Tuf Shin. I'm not so good with this stuff, but basically they will say, 785, not 5785. They don't bother with the 5,000 because people don't live over 1,000 years, right? So it's enough to say that he died in the year 785, and they're not dealing with the thousands place. So they were doing the same thing back then. Tuf Shin, right? Tuf is the last letter, that's 400. Shin is 300, so that's the 700. The 85, therefore, right? What's 80? Somebody help me out. Iron. Right. What do we got here? 70 is ayin. And so it's pei? No, pei? Yeah, Tuf Shin pei. Yeah, is 80. Pei is 80. And then hey for the 5. So Tuf Shin pei hey is how you would say 785. Okay, I'm actually almost done for today. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. Okay, so the point is he might have dropped the thousands place, and he's actually dating from the Exodus from Egypt. How do we know that he didn't do that? Where am I? And the scribe left out the first 1,000 years from the time of the Exodus and held on only to the last 1,000 years, omitting the thousands digit and writing merely the hundreds, tens, and single digits. And if so, this promissory note is post-dated. So Rav Nachman said in response, the practice is that in the exile we count years only according to the Greek kings. Why is the Jewish people dating according to Greek kings? Because that's the world that they lived in the exile. Upon hearing this reply, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov thought Rav Nachman is merely deflecting my legitimate questions with his answer. Afterward, he went out, examined the matter, and he discovered that it was as Rav Nachman said, as it is taught in a Baraisa, in the exile, we count years only according to the Greek kings. Ravina said the Mishna is also precisely formulated as it teaches that we calculate according to the Greek kings. As we learned in the Mishna in Rosh Hashanah 2a, on the 1st of Nisan is the new year for kings and for the festivals. And we say about this with regard to what law is it stated that the 1st of Nisan is the new year for kings? And Rav Chisda said it is with regard to dating documents and determining their validity. And we learn in the same Mishnah on the 1st of Tishrei in the new year this is the new year for counting years and for calculating sabbatical cycles. And we say with regard to what law is it stated that the 1st of Tishrei, right, Rosh Hashanah in the month of Tishrei, is the new year for counting years. And Rav Chisda said it is with regard to dating documents. These two statements with regard to the dating of documents are difficult in light of each other. As according to one statement, the dating system is based in Nisan as the first month, right, when Passover is in the spring, whereas according to the other, the year begins in Tishrei. So what are we going to do if we're dating legal documents? We need to know. And we resolve the contradiction by explaining that here the dating is according to the kings of Israel, and there the dating is according to the kings of the Gentile nations of the world. That is, when we date years according to the kings of the nations of the world, we count from the month of Tishrei. Whereas when we date years according to the kings of Israel, we count from the month of Nisan. And it made more sense to count from Tishrei because we don't have kings of Israel anymore now that we are in the exile. Ravina explains his proof, and now that we count from the month of Tishrei when dating documents, one can claim as follows. If it enters your mind that we count and date years using the Exodus from Egypt as the starting point while leaving off the first 1,000 years, right, the thousands place, then we should count from the month of Nisan when the Exodus occurred. So rather, isn't it correct to conclude from the Mishnah that we count years according to the Greek kings? And the Gemara affirms, yes, conclude from it that the scribal years are in fact calculated according to the Greek kings. Therefore, one should explain, as did Rav Nachman, a promissory note that appears to be post-dated by 6 years may not actually be a post-dated promissory note. Rather, it is assumed to have been written by an exacting scribe, which is to tell you that there were exacting scribes and non-exacting scribes, and you just had so many different kinds of legal documents being drafted in different regions that could end up becoming before a judge, that they had to take into account all these possibilities and be very well learned and well versed in them when they then had to judge a case of, can a creditor seize a field purchased from a borrower, that he has a lien on it with a promissory note, like very practical, real world outcome according to this whole body of knowledge. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me take a few questions or comments, if there are any, as my Google Doc is reloading for Nina to pass me these comments and questions. Joseph, didn't Rome begin to collapse around the time of the Gemara? Right, exactly. So the Gemara is collected around the year 500. And already the Roman Empire has certainly been weakening. Didn't it fall, like remembering from high school, right? But wasn't 476 a very important year in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire? I think there was a difference between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. But my understanding, right, is that just as you say, right around that time, is when the Roman Empire was really on the decline, had gotten very soft, very involved and addicted to their pleasures and their taxation and, holding up the rich at the expense of the poor, not reproducing, kind of like a late stage civilization, and they had become vulnerable to these upstart civilizations around their borders and eventually fell. And Yosef also says, did the rabbis consult the books of the Maccabees to determine some of these laws in history? I remember going over the Jewish canon of scripture in another tractate a while ago. Why is it not considered scripture? Well, because the sages said it was not. It was not included. It was not canonized. It's an important book sort of for Jewish history, but it didn't make the cut. As it were. It did not make the cut. They had big arguments over whether the Song of Songs would be included in the Bible or not. And there was a really big fight about that. And I believe that Rabbi Akiva was the great proponent and carried the day over whether that would be included in the Bible or not. Why did they not include the Maccabees? It might have had something to, I don't know, I'm speculating now, but it might have had something to do with for the same reasons that this, in the mind of the sages and in the teachings of the sages, especially when you read about Hanukkah in Tractate Shabbos, right? We have a Tractate Megillah, which is about the Purim story, and the Book of Esther made it into the Bible. But the story of Hanukkah, right, which has a mitzvah associated with it, didn't make it into the Bible. And when the sages talk about Hanukkah, they really are much more prone to talk about the miracle of the lights and the salvation that God bestowed upon the Jewish people in that period, than they are to talk about the military prowess of Judah Maccabee and eventually the Hasmonean monarchs. Why? Because in the time of Akiva and the sages, who saw not only the temple destroyed in the year 70, but 65 years later, the disastrous rebellion against Rome, known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, in which I think 1 million Jews were slaughtered, were really genocided by the Romans because of that uprising. And they just said, look, we lost the temple, and we're not going to be like, just like when in the sin of the spies, and Moses and Joshua and the children of Israel in the desert, and when the people freaked out and God said, okay, well, you guys are not going to go into the promised land, your children will. And they said, oh, we sinned, we were wrong, we shouldn't have freaked out. Of course, with God helping us, we can go up and defeat these child-sacrificing wicked nations that are occupying the promised land now. Let's go. And Moses said, well, too late, you blew that. Your children will have that right, you don't. And they said, well, let's go up anyway, and God will help us. And God didn't, right? Those people were utterly destroyed. Likewise, when the spiritual level of the nation had fallen so low that we didn't merit to have the temple in our midst anymore, then we were not going to be able to rise up and rebel against Rome and defeat Rome. And when they tried that, and Rabbi Akiva believed in Bar Kokhba as some kind of a messianic figure, then he was wrong. It was a terrible, terrible disaster for the Jewish people. And so the sages in the aftermath of that said, yeah, like the story of the Maccabees, that's not something we need inspiration from right now. What we need to do is learn how to pray, learn how to learn Torah, and learn how to keep Judaism alive in the diaspora for as long as this exile is going to last, so that it will survive, whether this period is 100 years or 1,000 years or 2,000 years. And then, God will bring us back by sending Mashiach, etc. And perhaps that's why the books of the Maccabees was not included in the Bible. That is pure speculation on my part. That's what I've got for us today with God's help. See you tomorrow on Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.